This week on To the Contrary.
First, should Harvey Weinstein go to jail for assaulting women who went to his hotel room voluntarily? Then, should transgender female athletes be allowed to play girls' sports? Behind the headlines, for Black History Month, we look at racial healing through the eyes of some high-profile African American women.
I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, Weinstein's Me Too trial.
Movie mogul Harvey Weinstein's rape and sexual assault trial goes to the jury next week. In closing arguments, his lawyer called on the jury of 7 men and 5 women to hold the women accusing him responsible for their actions. Donna Rotuno argues the women were actually embarrassed because they tried to use Weinstein to advance their careers. Weinstein could face life in prison if convicted on the 5 counts of rape, criminal sex acts, and predatory sexual assault. Dozens of women have alleged sexual misconduct by Weinstein, but this case involves 2 accusers. Miriam Haley says he forced her to have oral sex in 2006. Jessica Mann claims he raped her in 2013. Weinstein insists all sexual relations were consensual.
So, Congresswoman Norton, is Weinstein's attorney trying to reverse current criminal law, or is he liable because these women came to his hotel room consensually?
Weinstein's attorney is not trying to reverse current law. He's trying to change what the word consent means.
I think she's trying to do her job, which is in a he said, she said situation to inject questionable other facts around the circumstances.
Look, just because you consent to going to a hotel room doesn't mean that you consent to being raped or to have a sexual assault committed against you. Absolutely no. No still means no.
And also the power dynamic. You're talking about one of the most powerful people in the world, if not Hollywood. So that's the dynamic that we also have to be mindful of.
But we'll talk about the trial and the verdict next week in a second, but shouldn't the message to young women here be, don't go to a hotel room after you've had drinks and dinner with a guy?
Well, there's more than going to a hotel room here. Now, we're putting this in words that are most favorable to him. The fact is that there will follow-up. There's some follow-up with these women. Did you get my phone number? A good defense lawyer can make a lot of the repartee between them. Yes, you should never go to a hotel room with a man that is not your intimate partner. Right. But that's not what did it. What did it more than anything else was the continuing contact, some of it initiated by these women. Weinstein is not in the worst possible place in this case.
How do we think he's going to do next week? Because one thing Rotuno also did was go very aggressively after the victims, trying to make them look really bad, and there's possibility the jury will will not like that.
I mean, I think it's going to come down to if there's evidence. It's a he said, she said situation. So can the prosecution prove these victims have some sort of evidence that these women said no in the moment? I mean, to the larger question about what are we teaching our young women, we do. Your generations have always taught us to make wise decisions. And yes, there is going to be a trade-off between whether you want to advance and what it might take to advance. And I think the Me Too movement, an unintended consequence is to take all of the responsibility off the shoulders of women in every situation.
Well, I don't think so at all. And in fact, just because you exercise poor judgment, and I would agree, maybe that was poor judgment, you look at the power dynamic between Weinstein and what these women needed for their careers, but it doesn't mean that they deserve to have themselves forced into oral sex or any other kind of behavior. And so I think that at some point or other, we have to say men also have to take responsibility for their own actions and for their decisions vis-a-vis women. And you can't use the fact of that power, and that's what we're talking about, as an excuse for a sexual assault.
And also, the burden of proof in every criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. And so that's the role of the defense attorney, is to say, the state has the burden of proof, and if it doesn't reach to that level, that is the issue. And I think that is an issue when it comes to rape allegations and sexual misconduct. But you cannot take away from the power dynamic throughout the entire process.
Well, Representative Edwards, the left seems to me to have a problem by allowing people like J-Lo and Shakira, let's say, for example, to 50-year-old woman to wear very scantily clad clothes before an audience of bazillions of people at, one of the most watched events on television, and twerk and pole dance. And when young people are seeing that, and Hollywood is seen as liberal, even though we know there are conservative actors and actresses, if that word is still used anymore. But don't young girls get a bad message, the wrong message? Their message is, use sex to empower yourself. Well, if you just flirted with Harvey Weinstein, let's say, these women, they wouldn't have gotten jobs out of him, and they knew that. So how are young women supposed to use sex as an empowerment, as opposed to not having sex and drawing a bright line between work and romance?
Well, look, I think this is very complicated, but, the reality is that women should not have to go around policing everything they wear, everything they say, everything they do, because men decide to use their power over them and commit sexual assault. And so, look, I'm not going to go on a stage and twerk. Well, heaven forbid we should even see that. But at the same time, if I did, or if I were on a pole, it does not give permission to assault me.
Look, just like men will have, men like Vice President Pence will not go in a room alone with a woman, and perhaps I don't blame him. In the same way, women need to understand that in their relationships with men, they need to be hands-off.
And the interesting thing about our culture now is that because everything's so hypersexualized, it's actually more empowering for women to be more modest and also men to be more respectful. I think especially when you're in the workforce, it's refreshing, quite frankly, to interact with men and women for it to be perfectly professional. Those are what we should be all aspiring for, both men and women.
How far away from that are we?
Oh, we're here. It's just that you got to be able to, everybody has to keep their guards up, men and women. It's not just men who are taking advantage of women. There are women who use their sexuality to overpower men.
Vast minority.
But either way, we go back to how do we represent ourselves, and can we get back to a proper decorum?
Well, and there's, I think, a role for female leaders and mentors to play in younger women, saying, hey, what you wear to the club on Saturday night is not what you need to be wearing to the office. And sadly, in our today's workplace, we're seeing fewer and fewer of those kinds of conversations.
All right, let us know what you think about this. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay, or @ToTheContrary. From the Weinstein trial to cisgender high school athletes suing to keep transgender athletes out of girls' sports.
The families of 3 Connecticut girls are suing to block transgender athletes from competing against them. They are supported by the conservative group Alliance Defending Freedom, which claims that allowing transgender girls in girls' sports is unfair and violates Title IX. The ADF has been labeled an anti-LGBTQ hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, a claim the conservative group disputes. Connecticut schools insist their policy follows state law, which says students must be treated according to the gender they identify with. The lawsuit centers around 2 transgender sprinters who have won more than a dozen state championship races since 2017. The 3 girls who are suing have finished behind the transgender girls at times, though not always. The ACLU is supporting the transgender girls and the Connecticut school system. The ACLU argues that Title IX protections don't hinge on whether someone has XX or XY chromosomes.
So are these girls correct?
I think they are correct. I think we are in a time and a place where Title IX was established to create opportunities like female athletic sports for young girls and women to participate. And when you start to make the argument that anyone who identifies as a girl or as a woman can participate, you have unintended consequences that limit sports athletic opportunities for girls who are born biologically female. And I see some people say there's no science. There is science to support the idea that a male is physically stronger, taller, and even with hormone treatments, you still can't overcome some of those natural structural.
Doesn't that depend when the hormone treatments start, though? I mean, they're 5-year-olds on hormones now.
Well, this difference needs to be understood much more scientifically than we understand it today. But there is a great difference between this issue and ordinary sex discrimination issues. These are people who have denominated themselves the way they feel as the opposite sex. Nothing has changed about the male characteristics they have. Now, if you're for equality between
Well,
men,
they say they get weaker when they're on the hormones.
I don't know anything about the hormones.
I will say
this was not about hormones. This was about trans men.
Trans women.
Trans women, I'm sorry, are operating as men. And what I'm trying to say is, all right, who are they competing against? And I'm assuming if we go into hormones.
They're born girls.
Yeah, we're assuming they're competing against born girls. And I therefore have to assume, and here's where I agree with you, that those girls almost always will have less in muscular ability, and that is just the difference between men and women. I don't think, and I must say I heard nothing in the response that says anything but this is the way these people have denominated themselves. Nothing about any change in their bodies. Nothing that says why have they won all of these contests between biological women. Now, if we want to keep Title IX, why did Title IX separate men and women in the first place?
Right.
If we want to keep Title IX law and wipe out the physical distinctions between men and women, we're going to be unfair to women.
Right, and I think Delegate Norton about that, because as a former female athlete myself, talk about track. You're talking about the matter of seconds that make up the difference. Split seconds. And apparently these two trans girls have participated in 89 competitions, and bested all the women in the field. That is the issue, that especially women in sports, girls in sports, if we don't do anything about this now, this will probably be the lowest mark in feminism, mark my words.
Are you going to be the only person on the panel to defend the trans women?
Probably so, because, I mean, first of all, I think that we are not talking about trans women overwhelming women's sports. I mean, this is really a handful of instances where this happens. I think it's important to know whether we have, instances of hormone therapy that then impacts physical qualities and abilities, and we need to know a lot more about that. But I don't think I think given the numbers, I don't think this is something that's going to jeopardize women's sports. I, too, was a woman athlete. What we hear from these reports is that they've won, a dozen championships, but they haven't won all the championships. They've won some races. They haven't won all the races. And so I don't think that this is an issue that is going to overwhelm and dominate women's sport.
You played basketball when you were in the house with the men.
I played basketball. I ran. Yes, I did. I played basketball.
The guys weren't as tall, if not taller, than you most of the time.
Yeah, but then I had other skills, and I played on the football team, as well. And I had other skills. But this isn't about one individual or other. It's about saying, how is it that we can both balance preserving and protecting women's sports and women athletes, and at the same time recognize that we have a very, very tiny minority who boys who identify as girls, and some of whom may be going through hormone therapy and want to be able to fully realize
this is very
their
bad
capacity.
for feminism.
I just want to I want to say that I know a lot of moderate to progressive Democrats who agree with these girls because they've had children.
Wait, which girls? The
with the girls who are
biological
suing, with the lawsuit, because they really feel it is unfair. And I see it as unfair not just in sports, modeling. I love the show Pose on Fox. I can't wait for the next season. But those men who've transgendered to women are beautiful. And because they're men, they're 6 foot tall. And one of them has already been on the cover of, I think it was Mademoiselle or one of the young women's magazines. And that displaced a spot that was for a woman. And if I were a model, I'd be furious about that.
Yeah.
And I think
Bonnie, look, the biological differences between men and women have been scientifically proved. And it seems to me that this is a terrible blow for feminism.
It is.
As we say, and I don't know what you mean, Donna, well, we don't have very many of them yet, so what does it matter? We will encourage more to believe that you can compete this way, overwhelm the girls, even though there is no dispute between the biological difference between a man and a woman with respect to strength and the other characteristics. Feminism will go by the board if that is the way we justify what equality means. Equality in every other respect, except physical strength, we need to stand for. But to say that there is no differences between men and women biologically in the way they're constructed so that men are stronger.
Well, I think you're
Donna.
exaggerating what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't physical differences between men and women, but I think there is a lot more that we need to know. If trans women are undergoing some kind of hormone therapy or other, there probably is some science behind, what their muscle strength is, what their capacity is, and we need to understand those things before putting a blanket restriction on competition.
Well, wouldn't it depend on when they start hormone therapy
The
too?
moment-
I mean, if you started,
I don't know enough
if you
about
started at
hormones.
5,
I don't think
it's your bones aren't going to grow as big as if
moment-
you started at 20.
The moment they have to deal with periods every month, then we'll talk.
All right, behind the headlines, Black History Month. We spoke to 3 leading African American women, including actor Storm Reed, at the National Day of Racial Healing to get their perspectives on how we can bring this country together.
The most important thing that we work on is what we call structural racism.
We can't go on like this. This isn't the way that we want this country to be.
We are trying to push forward every day through civic engagement and equity work that we can try to make a change through love.
LaJune Montgomery, Jamila Lemieux, and Storm Reed are 3 leading African American women. They belong to different generations and work in different fields, but they're united by a desire to heal division.
Some people believe that if it isn't in your heart to be a racist, then you're not, which we understand that. But there are systems that were created out of racism that are alive and well still in this country today.
All 3 attended the National Day of Racial Healing, an event hosted by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation.
We want it to be a day of healing, where people come into communities hand in hand, have tough conversations, tell their truths, tell their personal stories, and begin to think about what can we do together in this community to create opportunities for everyone.
Part of the work the foundation performs is something called a healing circle. Diverse groups of about 30 people come together to share their stories and try to understand each other.
And when you're in a healing circle, that's the moment where you begin to not only reflect on your own journey and really find the confidence of yourself, your own story and your journey, but then share that with someone else and then connect the dots around one humanity. Maybe with someone you haven't ever sat down with, someone of a different nationality, a different race.
All three women acknowledge sometimes sharing these truths becomes uncomfortable.
We don't always want to talk about these things. We want someone else to do it. And it's fair to feel that way. It's human, right? And there are folks who don't want to talk about these things because they don't want to feel antagonized or blamed for something that isn't of their doing, even if they benefit from it, right? But we're not going to get better if we don't get uncomfortable.
Some people come unwillingly at the beginning, and that's okay, because it's a space of learning for everyone, and everyone who has participated has ended up learning something.
We're not all the same, and we're never going to be the same, and we're not going to be able to walk in the same shoes, and we're not all going to be the same race or the religion or gender. There's so many things that separate us, but when you think about it, we are still all human.
Congresswoman Edwards, is this the way to end racism? Will it work, or is it too small scale?
Well, I do think it's small scale. Do I think that it's necessary to have these conversations in communities and among people in a way that people can unbear themselves and be safe? Very important. But changing racism is also about changing systems as well as changing culture. And we have to do a lot more from, government entities on down to change the systems that reinforce racism.
Well, I think the idea of bringing people together of different backgrounds is actually really good. And the research demonstrates that when people voluntarily get to talk with one another and interact, then they start to change their perceptions. When it comes to systemic changes, I think we need to start from, well, what have we accomplished? And I think we've come very far in this country today. And then, where are there laws that are holding people back? Yes, then that's a great opportunity to change those. I think at the state level, occupational licenses hold people of color back in particular because it makes it hard for them to be able to get into vocations that they need to. So there's room for commonality and agreement here.
Well, the notion of people talking with one another, so long as there's no blame game going on and they're having honest conversations about differences, after we've gone through periods when legal segregation is dead, when young people respond to people of other races in a way that my generation did not, to the extent that we live in a society where there is still not conversation between black people and white people, if that day of healing is promoting that, it's all to the good.
But discrimination at this point, the Supreme Court eliminated busing decades ago, but people still, either due to economics or by choice, probably some of both, live in separate neighborhoods. They still do it. And there's so few people of color in my community, for example. They formed a committee to recruit more buyers of color. So, but what do you do? When housing is segregated, what do you do?
Well, for me, what I did is left the Democratic Party, quite frankly. The most support I've actually had are from conservatives, and most of them are Caucasian. And that's the thing, there are certain people who benefit from us being divided by skin color, by race, by gender, by ethnicity, et cetera. I feel more empowered as a black conservative. We talked about before. Our commonality is, for example, our patriotism, or our religious beliefs, or our faith in God. And that's something that we I personally felt, in 2013-14, I felt as if, all white people are racist. But the moment that you step out of that paradigm, you realize, plus in a state like Maryland.
There were plenty of white people in the Democratic Party.
What I'm saying
she
is,
left the most diverse party in the United States with the all-white Republican
Diversity
Party.
narrowly defined
so
as race and gender.
What? The party that nominated me in 2018 was Republican. So that is what I'm saying.
I'm so confused because from the top of the leadership on down, there's nothing but been racism spewed out of that at that party. But the point is that we do worship in different places. We may go to work together, and so it's important for us to come together and have conversations. But that is not the way you change the racist systems in this country.
How do you?
Well, I think that you do it by having one leadership that speaks to that, and a willingness of leaders to make changes both in laws and in work environments. You know, changing culture takes a lot of work, and that work begins with the leadership, whether it's at a university or it's at, you know, a corporation, integrating boards, making sure that your senior leadership and your C-suite is more representative of diverse communities. This is hard work, and we have to do it in every sector.
And housing. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the Cornell Douglas Foundation, committed to encouraging stewardship of the environment, land conservation, watershed protection, and eliminating harmful chemicals. Additional funding provided by the Wallace Genetic Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more PBS.